Hey guys, what is up? My name is Mpo and I'll be teaching you how to create this scene in Blender. Now I will be using some custom assets to create this, but don't worry, I will provide you with those which you can have a look at in the description below. Now let's get started. Shift A, add in a cube. Scale it on the Z-axis by 6.47 and then scale it on the x-axis by 13.7, and now lastly on the y-axis by 12.8. And go into top view, then position your camera accordingly. Another thing that would help is by pressing N and select lock camera to view. So now you can move around and it'll automatically control your camera. I think this should be fine. In side view, I'm going to select my main cube, Shift D to duplicate, move it to the side, scale it down, something about like that, and this is going to be our window. And I think this should be okay. Now the next thing to do is select the main room, and we are going to separate it so that it has a ground plane and the main room. So I'm going to select this bottom part, P, and separate selection. On the side view, I'm going to select this main cube and I'm going to add a modifier, solidify modifier. I'm just going to increase the thickness to something like that. So I think that should be okay. So now if you have a look, the scaling is uneven from the top and the sides. But if you select Shift A and apply the scale, that should fix that problem. So now you can scale it up to something like that. I think, yeah, that thickness should be fine. And we're going to add another modifier, which is a Boolean modifier, and select our second cube right over there. So now what we're going to need to do next is select this cube, come over here, and where it says viewport display, we're going to change that to bounds. And we're also going to need to remove it from our renders by selecting these two right over here. And looking at that, I think that should be okay. Now the next thing to do would be to model our interior. So I'm going to press 0 on the numpad and Shift D, duplicate our room, remove our modifiers, and I am going to add a loop somewhere around there. This is going to be, I think they call it a skirting board. Something like that should be okay. And I'm going to select this whole edge loop, Shift Control I, no, it's Control I, sorry, Control I, X, delete the faces. And we're going to add another solidify modifier and increase the thickness, something like that. Should be fine. And then add a bevel to that around, I'd say 3 segments should be okay. And then basically from there, it's all up to you how you want the bevel to behave. With the use of an add-on called Archimesh and Archipect, so just select these two ticks and this should enable the add-on for you. So Shift A, I'm going to go into Archimesh and I'm going to add a panel window. Select the window, press N, and it should give you these properties, which allow you to basically add windows, panels. So if you look at the V counts, it's going to add vertical panels, onto this thing. So I'm just gonna say 4 on the vertical, and on the horizontal, I'm gonna say something like 5, I think should be okay. And if you look down here, these just basically scale up each panel. So the ones down here are for the vertical, and the ones over here are for the horizontal. It's just a matter of basically playing around with these numbers until you find something that you like. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. All right, so the window's complete now. I think the next step would be to add in some light into the scene, just to have a look how everything looks like so far. So I'm just gonna add a sun source, and I'm gonna position it something like this. So it's gonna be coming in from the side, and it's gonna hit the window at an angle something like this, I'd say. I think that should be fine. All right, and then the next thing to do would be to add in an environment. So I'm going to change this from Eevee to cycles, and over here in this pad, I'm going to add an environment texture. Locate a folder to where your HDRs are, and what I'm using here is basically some HDRs from HDR Haven. These are completely free, you can check them out and find something that you like. So the one I'm going to be using specifically is the sunrise one. So now if you have a look at the render view, this is what we have. Seems a bit dull, and I'd say we need to increase the light source. So clicking here on the sun, I'm just gonna increase this to something, I'd say 12, and automatically you see that we have a more powerful light source. Another thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change the color of the sun to something a bit yellowish. And then the next thing from here to do would be to change the environments and also boost that up to something like a value of 5. That is beautiful. So now our scene is almost finished. And now the only thing that we need to do is basically to just decorate and add some elements to the scene. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a curtain. And that's very simple to add. It's just basically a cylinder rotated by 90 degrees on the y-axis. Scale it down, something a bit thin. And then we're gonna scale it up again to be very long on the y-axis, x-axis, sorry. And from there, I'm just gonna grab one edge and extrude it down, something like that. And then we're gonna mirror this. Go to mesh, symmetrize, and that is gonna mirror it. And if it accidentally mirrors it on the wrong axis, you can just change it over here by selecting one of these. And I'm gonna rotate this by 180 degrees on the z-axis. And then lastly, I'm actually gonna duplicate this whole thing, Shift D, P, selection, and I'm gonna delete everything but this last segment. Something was a bit of a mistake there. I selected the wrong one. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna redo that, and I'm gonna delete everything on top and leave just this bottom one. So now what we can do is we're gonna scale this by pressing Shift Y, no, Shift Z. I'm gonna scale it down to something like that, and then scale it back up on the x-axis. So now what we have is something like this. Great, that's basically most of our scene done. So now what you can do is basically, it's all up to you now. You can change how you want the scene to look. And we're gonna do this with the help of some few models, which I already prepared. You can get these for only $6 on the Blender market, or you can use your own models, or get some other free models on the Blender markets and BlendSoft. The models I'll be using today is called the furniture pack. So I'll just append each model one by one. Forgot to add in a new collection. And this is where everything that I append will go to. Let's actually rename this and call this the room. And we'll call this interior. So I'm going to locate my models, and my models happen to be right over here. And the first thing I'll add is this armchair. I'll select my model and I will position it somewhere like so. Now these models, the great thing about them is everything is already textured, so you just plug and play and everything just automatically works wonderfully. Just have a look at this. All right, so now one thing that I see is that our framing is a bit off. I'm just gonna grab this camera and move it a bit back to something like that. So my intention is to have the chair on the corner and the sun is gonna hit it from an angle. All right, so now we're gonna add in some more models. I'm just gonna append. And I'm gonna add this stool. Scale it up a bit. It's too big. And position it somewhere around like that. And I'm gonna keep adding models. Append. And now I'm gonna add this skinny table. And that's the joy of using models. It actually saves you a lot of time and you can focus on creating your art. All right, that looks okay, but now we need to change something. This curtain that we have here, we need to make it translucent. So if I go here into the material tab, add a new material, and in the surface, I'm gonna look for translucent. And if you have a look now, the material looks translucent, and that looks a lot better because now it just allows the light to come into the scene through this material, and it just looks realistic. All right, so now I'm going to keep adding models. File, append, and what I have here is some books. So I'm going to grab these books and I'm going to put them by the window. What you can do to actually add in these models very quick is if you select the cursor tool and select where you want it to move, Shift S, which object selected, and then selection to cursor. That will move your object very quick, and you don't have to struggle on positioning it. So as you see, it's just a matter of set decoration. And I have this lamp over here. I'm going to do the same thing, select our cursor tool, and then selection to cursor. Something like this. And how easy was that? We did not have to model any. This is the basic look of our scene. We have our books here by the window, and actually I'm going to reposition those. I'm going to rotate them on the z-axis by 180 degrees. And that looks amazing. So now what we're going to need to do is to add a texture on our floor. So I'm going to select that floor, press U, and unwrap it. And I'm going to add another tab here just by holding that and then dragging it up. And I'm going to go into the shader editor. So now I've just isolated that floor just so you can see what we're doing a bit better. And I'm going to add a new material, call this wooden floor. Shift A, and we're going to add an image texture. So I'm going to drag that into the base color. Click open, and I'm going to select this albedo wooden texture. So now the texture is a bit small. Actually, no, it's too large, and we're going to need to scale that up. Select your texture and press Ctrl T, and that should bring this mapping and texture coordinates. And on the scale options, we're going to scale it up by 5. No, actually 5 is too big. Scale it up by 3. Yes, 3 seems to be okay. And I'm going to Shift D, duplicate this, put it here, connect our mapping, and now I'm going to look for the roughness. And I'm going to connect it to the roughness. And this is what we have now. It's too shiny, and this is because it's set to sRGB color space. So if we change that to non-color space, let's just wait for it. We have something like this, and it automatically looks realistic. I'm going to Shift D, and we're going to add one more thing, which is the normal. And this is just going to give it some height information, because if you have a look now, it is quite flat. So I'm going to Shift A, and I'm going to add a normal map. Drag this color, it's the color of the normal map, and put this into the normal output. And then we're also going to grab the mapping and plug it into the vector of our texture. Right, so I see we didn't change this to normal. Let's just wait for it. And then we're also going to change this sRGB to non-color. Right, and that is basically our texture completed. So now if I return back, this is what our scene looks like. So now that our scene is practically finished, the next thing to do would be to, I'd say, take care of the lighting and add in some foliage, just to add in some of those realistic elements to the scene. So I have some textures here. No, actually, no. You need to go to preference and add in the images as planes add-on. So just make sure that that checkbox is ticked, and Shift A, and we're gonna go to images as planes. I'm gonna locate my textures, and I'm gonna add this one here that says backdrop. I found this one on the internet somewhere, I just can't remember where, but you can find a lot of these backdrop trees, which really help add some realism to your scenes. Just gonna make sure that that's positioned correctly. And what I'm gonna do actually is I'm actually gonna open up the shader editor, and I'm gonna add an emission texture to this. Or I could just drag this and bring it right over there. So now let's have a look. All right, that seems okay, but it has some black if you have a look at these areas. So I'm gonna Shift D to duplicate that, and I'm gonna locate this texture right over here, which is basically, if you have a look at it, this is what it looks like. It's a black and white image which separates the skies from the trees. So if I take that and I move it into the alpha channel, that will basically solve everything. So now if you have a look at it from the camera view, we're going to need to position it properly. Let's select that, move it up a bit, something like that. All right, now you can begin seeing our texture. Now I'd say that it's too close, so I'll move it just a bit back, and I'm going to scale it up a bit as well. And we're going to position it again. Let's have a look. All right, something like that is okay, I'd say. right side seems okay. Might be wrong. It's basically, this thing is basically all up to you how you want to do this. So I'm going to add another texture, Shift A, images as planes. And I'm going to look for this tree texture right over there. Now, what this is basically a tree that I rendered out as a particle system. So yeah, it was a particle system and I just rendered it out like this just to save some memory, because rendering trees can be quite intensive on a computer. So this is a hack which I found on Blender Guru that's basically just allows you to render trees a lot faster than you would if you were to render it out as a particle system. So now if you have a look at this, we basically have a tree there, and we did not have to add in any particle systems. How nice does that look? Right, now the only issue I have here is the light isn't as intensive as I'd want it to be. And I think this is probably because of the material of the window. So now I have a hack for this. If you go into shader editor, I'm gonna move this over there and delete the principal BSDF. Delete this as well. And I'm just basically gonna use these two shaders, the glossy shader and the transparent shader. And I'm gonna set the roughness all the way to 0. And I'm gonna add a math node. Shift D to duplicate that. And I'm gonna add this is camera ray connected to the math node, and then grab the is glossy ray and then add it to the second math node. So now when we have a look at it, this is what we get. And on top of that, actually, I will grab our sun source and I'll just fiddle a bit with this until I find something, an angle which really pleases me. So basically what I want is I want the sun to sort of hit the chair, and yes, I'll just play with that a bit. All right, now this is what we have in our scene. I did increase the strength of the sun and it just automatically gave me better looking results, and I think I'm actually okay with this. So yes, right now it's just basically all up to you how you want this to look. You can move around the backdrop and just reposition it until you find something that you like. But this is basically it. This is how I was able to create my scene, which I will show you. I was able to achieve a much realistic interior design scene. So also another thing that you can do is you can grab these trees and kind of duplicate them and put them to sort of block the sun, and this will add some shadows, some realistic looking shadows into your scene, and it just adds just that fine detail into your scene. If you have a look right over here, you can see some of those shadows, and I think they really look nice, to be honest. They give it just that fine layer of detail. And then if you still feel that you don't have enough light coming into your scene, you can grab your sun source and let's say put it to 40. And on top of that, you can also grab your HDR and say a value of 10. This will just give your scene some light. And if you're still not happy, say, you could perhaps even put in another window on the side, which will just add an extra light coming to the scene. But this is what I was going for. I'll render this for you, and we'll have a look at how it plays out. So yes, what I'll do, because I'm rendering on the CPU, so it is quite slow. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give it a render, and then we'll have a look how it looks. So I did a test render of the scene, and just having a look at it already, I can tell that it's kind of dark, but not in a bad way. So what I want to do is just add in a bit of light, just to give it a little bit of pop, a little bit of glow to the scene. So what I done was I actually faked this by using a area light. So I placed an area light and positioned it at about this angle, just so I could get a bit of light. And um, the result is there. I can see it already. It's just gonna take some time to render, but I can already tell that that additional light source does bring a little something, and I just prefer that than having an entirely dark scene, if you know what I mean. But this is all up to you, as I'm saying. Um, oh, look at that! We actually forgot to put in a portrait, which is supposed to be somewhere around there. I see it there floating. So I'll quickly do that. I'll select this portrait and I'll position it right somewhere over there. Rotate it by 90 degrees, and there we go. We have our portrait, and I think we're ready to render. This is all that I have to show you today. So let's give us the render. I'm gonna set the pixels to the render samples to about 500, and we will have a look at how that renders. So if you're rendering on a CPU like me and don't have a GPU, a quick way to do this, or something that will help you render the scene a lot quicker, would be to decrease these samples to something about like 5. You could go down all the way to something like 1 or 2, and you won't see much of a difference. It's just gonna make the scene just a bit darker, but it doesn't really affect the scene in a negative, well, just drastically is what I'm saying. So I'm just gonna keep mine at 5. I think 5 is okay for now, or even 4 actually. And let's give us a render, and I will skip and show you the final results. And this is the final result. Took a while to render, but here we have it. I think this is actually looking very beautiful, to be honest. And this concludes my very first tutorial. Tell me what you guys think. Type a message down in the comments below and tell me what you guys would like to see, what I can improve, and I'll be releasing some more content in the future. So if you'd like to download this file, you can download it for free. I'll leave a link in the description for those who'd like to download this file and just play with it and see what you guys can come up with. So this will be all. And in the next video, this is what I will be doing.